President Trump pulls no punches in his first TV interview from the White House. I'm Elaine Quijano, and this is Red and Blue. Ahead on the program, President Trump revisits enhanced interrogation and answers questions about his immigration enforcement plans. But first, in his inaugural television interview as president, Donald Trump covered a wide range of topics, including border security, violence in Chicago, and his much-talked-about speech at the CIA. But one thing he made clear is that he wants to get to the bottom of the millions of illegal votes he believes were cast on Election Day.
You have people that are registered who are dead, who are illegals, who are in 2 states. You have people registered in 2 states. They're registered in New York and in New Jersey. They vote twice. There are millions of votes, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to do an investigation.
You're now president of the United States. When you say
of course, and I want the voting process to be legitimate.
But now, what I'm asking, when you say, in your opinion, millions of illegal votes, that is something that is extremely fundamental to our functioning democracy, a fair and free election. You say you're going to launch an investigation into this.
Done.
What you have presented so far has been debunked. It's been called false.
Take a look at the Pew reports.
I called the author of the Pew report last night, and he told me that they found no evidence of voter fraud.
Really? Then why did he write the report?
He said no evidence of voter fraud.
Excuse me. Then why did he write the report?
So
according to Pew report, then he's groveling again. You know, I always talk about the reporters that grovel when they want to write something that you want to hear, but not necessarily millions of people want to hear or have to hear.
So you've launched an investigation.
We're going to launch an investigation to find out, and then the next time, and I will say this, of those votes cast, none of them come to me. None of them come to me. They would all be for the other side.
To break this all down, let's bring in Ashley Pratt and Joel Payne in our Washington bureau. Ashley is a Republican strategist. Joel is a Democratic strategist and was a senior campaign aide for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And in San Diego, we have Liz Wheeler, host of Tipping Point on the One America News Network. Welcome to you all. Let me just get your quick takes. I want to go around here and get reaction to President Trump's comments there on voter fraud. Joel, let me start with you.
Sure. You know, Elaine, it's just so dangerous to have a president who has really little regard for the facts and for the truth. You know, David Muir told the president that the author of the report said that that was incorrect, and he just could not be moved off that point. It seems like a tactic of this White House to use misinformation and to use what they call alternative facts, but what we know are just untruths and lies to push their political agenda. It's really something that I think vigilance is going to be required from, because this president clearly has shown that the facts don't matter. It's very clear that voter fraud does not happen on the level that the president intimated. It's very clear that this has been investigated thoroughly many times. The Bush administration investigated this in 2005 and found nothing. The Pew research that the president referred to found nothing. So this is something that is very, very concerning for a president who we are expected to believe the words that are coming from him and his administration.
Ashley, what about that?
So voter fraud has been something that's been talked about for a very long time over the years. It's very hard to prove, though, especially in the masses that he's saying, 3 to 5 million voters. That seems, you know, almost indescribable in some ways, and we haven't really seen the facts of that surface yet. So I think here, you know, President Trump does have an opportunity to provide those facts. He did come out and say it was this Pew poll, this survey, this study that was conducted, and David Muir, you know, was quick to say that actually was not accurate. And then we've seen Representative Chaffetz say that he's, you know, chair of the Oversight Committee in the House, saying that he wouldn't pursue an investigation, but if Trump wanted to use the Department of Justice, go right ahead. And then we see Speaker Ryan also saying there's no evidence of this as well, to the widespread nature that Trump is speaking to 3 to 5 million people. But that is not to undermine the serious situation of voter fraud in America. And if there are ways to circumvent that, and there are ways to really help curb it, I think that should be something that we're discussing. But, you know, it does come down to whether or not it's at the level that Donald Trump says that it is.
Yeah, Liz, how do you see it? I mean, you do have Republicans in Congress very openly saying that they don't see any evidence, and in fact, inviting the Justice Department, as you just heard Ashley lay out there, to go ahead and investigate.
Right, and I do agree with Ashley here that I think if President Trump has a responsibility to us, not just to his party, but to the American people, when he makes a claim like this, he has a responsibility to provide some sort of substantiation or some sort of evidence here. But I want to push back on one thing that Joel said before. I don't think it's clear. We don't know for a fact one way or the other. And that's where today I've been a little mind-boggled, if you will, when we've seen from Republicans and from Democrats, both sides of the aisle, people claiming something unequivocally. Republicans are claiming there's voter fraud. Democrats are claiming there's not. The truth of the matter is we really don't know. There have been a few studies here and there. They haven't been very thorough. They haven't been very widespread. We don't know if there's voter fraud. And this is, I guess, where I don't understand why this is a partisan issue, because the integrity of our vote, whether we're Democrat, Republican, Independent, non-identified, what have you, the integrity of our vote is important. Who doesn't want to ensure that the integrity of our vote is intact here?
Yeah, we'll continue to see what develops on that front. But I want to move on to another issue here. The president took steps on his promise to build a wall by signing an executive order today. It came up in his interview. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Are you going to direct U.S. funds to pay for this wall? Will American taxpayers pay for the wall?
Ultimately, it'll come out of what's happening with Mexico. We're going to be starting those negotiations relatively soon, and we will be in a form reimbursed by Mexico, which I've always said.
So they'll pay us back?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yes.
So the American taxpayer will pay for the wall at first?
All it is we'll be reimbursed at a later date from whatever transaction we make from Mexico.
Mexico's president said in recent days that Mexico absolutely will not pay, adding that it goes against our dignity as a country and our dignity as Mexicans. He says, quite simply, they're not paying.
David, I think he has to say that. He has to say that. But I'm just telling you, there will be a payment. It will be in a form, perhaps a complicated form. And you have to understand, what I'm doing is good for the United States. It's also going to be good for Mexico. We want to have a very stable, very solid Mexico.
When does construction begin?
As soon as we can. As soon as we can physically do it. We're
within months?
I would say in months, yeah. I would say in months. Certainly planning is starting immediately.
So, Ashley, let me start with you. It sounds like American taxpayers are going to be on the hook, at least at first.
They will, but he does promise that we'll be reimbursed for that, so hopefully that is something that happens. Now, throughout the campaign, this was a plan that obviously energized his base, and a lot of people wanted stricter and tighter border security after seeing, you know, kind of mass immigration, illegal immigration coming into the United States. And this was something that he really capitalized upon throughout the campaign, and that was something, again, that energized his base. So I would think that many of them would be upset to find out that taxpayer dollars are initially paying for this, but if there's the promise of reimbursement, you know, that is a detail that needs to be spread far and wide to the American public, because that was something he said from the beginning Mexico would pay for it. So it's again holding him accountable to campaign promises as well as promises to the American people.
Liz, what do you think about that? Is that step that the president has taken here with this executive order, having the American taxpayers foot the bill initially and then having the reimbursement come later, is that going to be enough to satisfy those supporters who very much want to see a wall on the U.S. border with Mexico?
You know, Eileen, I think it will, because I think sometimes the talk about who's going to pay for it is a pivot, perhaps by the left, away from the importance of the issue here. And the issue with our border wall is the safety and security of the American people. I mean, the people who support building this wall, they're not just supporting it because President Trump, candidate Trump at the time, promised that Mexico would pay for it. They fundamentally believe in the sovereignty of our nation. They know that this border wall isn't just to keep out immigrants who are seeking a better life here in America. It's to keep out criminals, drug traffickers, terrorists, what have you. And so talking about just who's paying for it, I think, is perhaps a purposeful narrative from the left to avoid talking about why we need this wall in the first place. And I think the voters, a year from now when it's built, they're just going to be so happy it's built. They're not going to be focusing as much as the left probably will be on who were the ones that paid for it.
Well, at the same time, let me ask you, Liz, you know, you have a Republican Congressman, Will Hurd, whose district actually encompasses a good portion of the border, who says that a wall would essentially be the most expensive, least effective way of dealing with border security. There is his statement released just today. The facts have not changed, he said. Building a wall is the most expensive and least effective way to secure the border. What would you say to Congressman Hurd?
Well, I mean, I think President Trump addressed that somewhat in his executive actions today. He didn't just okay the building or the construction of this wall. He also said that he was going to hire more Border Patrol agents, because we all know what the border looks like along the United States-Mexico border. It's not possible to actually build a physical wall every single inch. Part of that wall is manpower. Part of it is technology. I mean, he's going to give the resources to be able to stop border crossings. I mean, he said he was going to end catch and release, too. That in and of itself, I mean, I know this gets a little theoretical here, but that in and of itself is part of the idea of the wall. It's really about securing the border. And just to go back to one other thing, too, from before, there are multiple ways Mexico can pay for this wall. I'm not just trying to parrot President Trump's talking points here, but I don't doubt that he will negotiate in some way that some payment in some form will be extracted from Mexico at some time.
Let me ask you, Joel, so Liz says that in effect, there could be a negotiation that would happen. But we also know that just today, we heard from the president of Mexico, President Peña Nieto, say once again, Mexico will not pay for this wall.
We did hear that, and I think the bigger point here is about the trustworthiness of the president's word. You know, the president spent a lot of time, I worked on the other side on the Clinton campaign, the president spent a lot of time the last 16, 18 months talking about how his word is gold and he is going to make sure that Mexico pays for this wall. And you hear today that the president has said, you hear what Speaker Ryan has said, that we're going to pay for the wall. And I think any voter out there that thinks that the president is going to be able to guarantee that taxpayers are paid back for this wall, that is a guarantee that the president will not be able to hold up. But I also think this is a distraction from the larger issue here. A border wall is fine. There are other things that are fine, but the real issue here is you need comprehensive immigration reform to make sure that undocumented Americans, or rather undocumented folks from Mexico, from other countries, we find a pathway to citizenship for them. And that is a serious problem that we have not heard the president yet really address. And that's something that I will be looking to hear from the White House and hear from the administration about how they plan to actually address that, something that we know is a problem, that we have 10 to 15 to upwards of 20 million people who we have to find a way to adequately work them into our American system.
Well, in fact, in his interview, President Trump also talked about the people known as dreamers, people who are in the U.S. who came to the country as children. Let's take a listen to some of that.
Right now, they're protected as so-called dreamers, the children who were brought here, as you know, by their parents. Should they be worried that they could be deported? And is there anything you can say to assure them right now that they'll be allowed to stay?
They shouldn't be very worried. They are here illegally. They shouldn't be very worried. I do have a big heart. We're going to take care of everybody. We're going to have a very strong border. We're going to have a very solid border. Where you have great people that are here that have done a good job, they should be far less worried. We'll be coming out with policy on that over the next period of 4 weeks.
So, Mr. President, will they be allowed to stay?
I'm going to tell you over the next 4 weeks.
All right. So let me start with you, Liz. What do you make of those comments?
I mean, I think it makes sense here. His focus, and he said this all along, when he was candidate Trump, President-elect Trump, and now President Trump, he said he's going to focus first on those who do America harm. And he's talking about the criminal aliens here, the illegal immigrants whose only crime was not crossing our border or coming here illegally, but the immigrants who have committed crimes, who have been convicted in our system of justice, who've been sentenced in our courts, and then who've been released back on our streets. I mean, again, to go back to a point I made before, I don't understand why this part of it is a partisan issue. I mean, I would think Democrats and Republicans alike, we want our neighborhoods, we want our cities to be safe here. President Trump should focus on the issue that poses us the most danger. The issue that poses us the most danger is these criminal aliens, not these otherwise law-abiding young people.
But does the president's action so far actually fulfill the promise that he made that he would undo President Obama's executive orders on immigration, including with these dreamers?
I mean, it's too early to tell. We're on, what, day 5, day 6 here of his administration. He said, you know, wait a couple weeks. He can't do everything in the first 10 days. I think there is this attitude within the Republican Party. We heard this from Speaker Ryan. We heard this from some of the other Republican candidates in the primary. They talked about first securing the border, taking care of the criminal aliens, and then gauging the temperature or the appetite of the American people for how to deal with what Joel was talking about before, you know, something like 15 million illegal immigrants. First comes safety, then comes what to do. But before you stop the flow of immigrants, it's hard to even make a decision about what to do with the ones who are already here.
Ashley, what do you think about this? The president, when he was running, said back in August that he would immediately terminate this and other executive orders when it came to immigration under President Obama. What do you think about the steps that President Trump has taken so far?
I think this is actually really interesting because this will actually make Democrats pretty happy. The March on Washington, the Women's March that happened this Saturday, you could hear women chanting in the streets here in D.C., you know, make sure DACA doesn't happen. They didn't want it to get repealed, and everything that they were chanting had to do with that, thinking that President Trump would, in fact, get rid of DACA. So I think that this will make them quite happy. I think this will actually, make some Republicans very unhappy, but we have seen kind of a tide change on immigration from people like Senator Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, who were supporters of DACA to begin with. So I think there's been a change in tone on that from this administration. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the coming months, if this is something that stays or if it's something that goes, because again, as you mentioned, he did make this a campaign promise to get rid of it back in August, but then once elected, I think in December, he had made a statement saying he would see what he could do to make sure everything was fair and to make sure that children had what they needed here. So I do think we've seen a change in tone on that. So again, it will be interesting as to whether or not it's politically popular for him to keep DACA in place and whether or not the American people are supportive of that.
Joel, what do you think? Does that sound like a shift to you?
You know, there's a lot of shifts with this president and this administration, to be honest with you. But, you know, the bigger thing here is we have to remember what this is about. These are dreamers. These students, you know, these young people are people who are coming, who have been brought to this country, who are here, who all they've known is America for their entire life, and who are as American as anyone on this panel right now, and who are our neighbors. They go to church and synagogue, and you know, they are in our communities. They are as much a part of our community as we are. And the fact that the president will not take this off the table is really disturbing. There are a lot of people who are not sleeping comfortably at night right now, and you know, I think the president could do a lot to quell a lot of concerns and a lot of fears by taking this off the table and, again, focusing on a broader, comprehensive immigration solution.
I want to turn to another issue. The president also suggested that he might be open to bringing back enhanced interrogation techniques. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
Mr. President, you told me during one of the debates that you would bring back waterboarding and a hell of a lot worse.
I would do what I would do. I want to keep our country safe. I want to keep our country safe.
What does that mean?
When they're shooting, when they're chopping off the heads of our people and other people, when they're chopping off the heads of people because they happen to be a Christian in the Middle East, when ISIS is doing things that nobody has ever heard of since medieval times, would I feel strongly about waterboarding? As far as I'm concerned, we have to fight fire with fire. Now, with that being said, I'm going with General Mattis. I'm going with my secretary because I think Pompeo is going to be phenomenal. I'm going to go with what they say. But I have spoken as recently as 24 hours ago with people at the highest level of intelligence, and I asked them the question, does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes.
All right, Joel, let me start with you. What do you make of President Trump's answer there?
It just creates some concern about who is he speaking with. You know, who are these advisors that he's talking to? We know from former CIA directors, we know from Senator John McCain, who was a POW. There are so many folks in our intelligence community and in our national security community who have told us that torture does not work. And not only does torture not work, but it's un-American. And again, there's this theme of the president going to sources to get his information that does not seem consistent with the information that we know. And if the president is getting this information from somewhere else, then he needs to disclose where he's getting this from. But it is not consistent with any public information that's been shared and with conventional wisdom that most people who are in the know on this issue follow.
Ashley, let me turn to you. What do you think about that?
I think this is an issue between candidate Trump and President Trump in the sense of the fact that the messaging is a little off, right? He's saying that he's going to heed the advice of his nominees, which would be General Mattis and Pompeo, and they have both said that they would not bring these interrogation tactics back. Now, what that means here, no one actually knows because Trump actually, you know, laid out specifics there saying that he would go back to doing this and that these are things that do work and that he's talked with security officials. But he had also said that he would listen to his nominees. And he has said at multiple points throughout the nomination process of, his cabinet picks that he would take their advice and listen to their opinions and that they do have minds of their own separate from him. So I think the American people can find some comfort in that. And I think that, they do have the best nature of all of us at heart. And I think that Donald Trump here is still trying to find his way because he's very unconventional in a lot of ways between the rhetoric of the campaign and what it means when you say words as President of the United States. So I'm sure as he gets more used to this, again, he's not your average politician. He doesn't have political experience. He's not well scripted. I think that he will come to find some difficulties in that and staying on message. But at the same time, I think, again, Americans can find comfort in the fact that his nominees to those top positions do not support enhanced interrogation tactics.
Well, Liz, where does this all leave congressional Republicans on this issue of torture?
First of all, I think this is something that's overlooked. I appreciate President Trump's honesty here, his willingness to admit that his personal belief is different than his advisors. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think any of the four of us have been privy to an enhanced interrogation. I don't know if we can sit here and say what works, what doesn't work. President Trump, to speak to Joel's point, he was very open in saying he's talked to people who told him that torture works. So he could very easily, as President of the United States, say, hey, I've been told this is what we're going to do. Instead, he's deferring to some of the best and the brightest minds, decorated military heroes here, General Mattis and now Secretary Pompeo. This is incredible. I appreciate his willingness to defer to these outstanding cabinet picks, but most of all, I appreciate his willingness to say, we're putting the American people first. If that's what it takes to keep us safe, that's what I'd be willing to do. But unless I'm told otherwise, we're going to go with what my experts say.
Well, Mr. Trump, as you know, faced criticism for talking about his inauguration crowd sizes during an official visit to CIA headquarters. Here's what he said about that.
You talked about other things, but you also talked about crowd size at the inauguration, about the size of your rallies, about covers on Time magazine. And I just want to ask you, when does all of that matter just a little less? When do you let it roll off your back, now that you're the president?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked. So I went to the CIA, my first stop. I have great respect for the people in intelligence and CIA. I don't have a lot of respect for, in particular, one of the leaders, but that's okay. But I have a lot of respect for the people in the CIA. That speech was a home run. That location was given to me. Mike Pence went up before me, paid great homage to the wall. I then went up, paid great homage to the wall. I then spoke to the crowd. I got a standing ovation.
You would give the same speech if you went back?
Absolutely.
In front of that wall?
People loved it. They loved it. They gave me a standing ovation for a long period of time. They never even sat down, most of them, during the speech. There was love in the room.
Ashley, let me start with you. What does that tell us, that he would go ahead and give the same speech again?
I think, again, this all comes down to messaging for him. It's easy to be that firebrand that he was on the campaign trail and to use whatever rhetoric he's used to. He does need to make that transition, and he needs to make it soon to President of the United States. I'm not saying that he needs to lose his authenticity, because that is essentially what got him elected. People were drawn to the fact that he doesn't, succumb to Washington, D.C. speak. He is a man of his word in that sense. He actually says what he means, and a lot of people appreciate that. With that being said, when David Muir asks him, when do you stop caring about crowd sizes, I don't know that that ever goes away for him. I think that's something that from the very beginning we've seen to be a sticking point for him when it came to ratings, crowd sizes, the amount of people at his rallies. So I think that narrative kept getting perpetuated throughout the first couple days of the administration. And it took some attention off of other issues that he was actually doing and being proactive on, like signing executive orders and actually, applying some things that he said he would do during the campaign. But again, he gets wrapped up in these little things that actually do not matter. And my advice to him would be to stop thinking in those terms as a candidate and to make that transition over to President of the United States when some of those things don't matter. But again, it enhances his personality, and that's why people elected him.
Liz, let me ask you. Ashley talks about a transition here. How soon do you think he needs to make this transition?
I mean, I don't really think he's going to change that much. He said so himself tonight in the interview. He said he doesn't want to change. That's why the American people voted for him, because he is who he is. I mean, I think he's doing a pretty good job. In regards to crowd size, I think it's funny. I think it's funny that he's obsessed with the crowd size. It makes sense in a way, because he came from The Apprentice, he came from being a showman, he came from, you know, his beauty pageants. He's used to ratings here. I just don't understand what difference it makes on either side. You know, Democrats who are arguing that President Obama's inauguration was bigger, or Trump arguing that his. I don't get what difference it makes, because it could be argued from either side. You could say, well, Obama's was bigger because he had more people turning out to support him, but you could also say Obama's was bigger because he had more protesters, or more people who were just interested in the historic moment, or more people who didn't like him. You can't read into crowd size in any way, so I just don't understand what difference it makes.
Joel, I'll give you the last word here as we wrap up. I think one of the criticisms was not just what he was talking about the crowd sizes, but where he was making those remarks in front of the wall of stars representing the fallen officers of the CIA.
Yeah, the location was completely inappropriate to do that. The setting, as he's standing literally in front of the fallen stars of people who have given the ultimate sacrifice to protect our country. The difference that it makes is that you know, when most presidents would be spending their first weekend in office doing their intelligence briefings, you know, figuring out how to map out their first 100 days, it seems like he spent his time obsessing over crowd sizes, obsessing over a march the following day of people who disagreed with him, and also obsessing over the suit color of his press secretary, if you look at some of the reporting that's come out in the last 2 days. So that's really, really troubling that this president has shown that those are his priorities, that the vanity has really gone to his head and has really taken control of where he's focused. This is our president. Our president should not be focused on these types of issues, you know, with all the things that we have going on in the world and all the things we have going on in our country.
Well, we will continue to watch it all and see if a transition, in fact, takes effect. Ashley Pratt, Joel Payne in Washington, and Liz Wheeler in San Diego. My thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, President Trump's new directives also include stripping funding for sanctuary cities. And some are already defiantly responding to his decision. We'll talk with the mayor of one city that's taking action next. Plus, the president says he will rely on the advice of his national security advisors on whether to resurrect waterboarding and other forms of enhanced interrogation. Ahead, we'll ask a former CIA officer for his perspective. You're watching Red and Blue. In addition to a border wall, President Trump also signed a directive that targets undocumented immigrants in the U.S. and some people trying to make their way into the country. For more on this, we turn to CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reed. Paula, can you lay out the specifics of the actions President Trump signed today?
Yeah, in the actions that he's taken today, he's trying to speed up deportations by giving the Department of Homeland Security additional resources. Now, among those resources, he wants to dramatically increase the number of boots on the ground, so the number of employees they have to actually execute these deportations. He also wants to increase the number of detention centers that they have, so when they arrest someone, they have a place to put them before they can be processed. And also, he wants to cut off federal funding to so-called sanctuary cities where local authorities have declined to actually implement federal immigration laws. Now, Elaine, several of those cities have already said that they intend to fight that provision in court.
Well, Paula, how does that policy differ from what's already in place at the Department of Homeland Security?
Yeah, it isn't really much of a policy change so much as it is an influx of resources and new tools. Now, all of these are subject to congressional appropriations. They need to get the money and the approval, but it's unclear, Elaine, whether or not this influx of resources will actually help them execute mass deportation without violating due process, because it's really the courts and the process before you deport someone that's really sort of the bottleneck. Of course, these resources will help, particularly the detention centers, but it may be much more difficult to actually deport as many people as they're trying to, even with all these resources.
And Paula, do we know how long it might take for these measures to go into effect?
Well, first they need to get the money from Congress, and then they'd have to hire all these people. Of course, there have been some limitations on federal hiring, so it could be a year, maybe more, before they actually get those boots on the ground and then can start going after individuals. They've said they want to prioritize those with criminal records. Then they're in the detention center, then there's the court. So, Elaine, before you'll actually see the numbers move on this, it could be years.
All right, Paula Reed in Washington for us. Paula, thank you. The directives signed today by President Trump include revoking federal funds from so-called sanctuary cities, which are said to protect undocumented immigrants. Bigger cities like Boston, Chicago, and New York are all at risk of losing billions of dollars in aid. Another city that could be affected is Los Angeles, and that's where we find our Carter Evans.
When it comes to taking on President Trump's immigration policy, California has drawn a line in the sand.
In California, immigrants are an integral part of who we are and what we become.
Governor Jerry Brown's message this week was blunt.
Let me be clear. We will defend everybody, every man, woman, and child who's come here for a better life and has contributed to the well-being of our state.
California has 18 sanctuary cities. Brian Abarca was born in Mexico and brought to the U.S. at age 3.
Are you worried that you might get pulled over for speeding one day, though, and end up getting detained?
Yes, that's everyday life.
He lives in Los Angeles, where Mayor Eric Garcetti has instructed police not to enforce immigration laws.
Even if it threatens federal funding in Los Angeles, you stand to get up to $500 million this year.
These are dollars that protect our port, our airport, keep homeless veterans off the streets.
You're saying pulling funding from LA could actually hurt the rest of the country?
No question.
There's anxiety, right, going around. There's a lot of worry.
Pedro Trujillo's parents, both undocumented immigrants, brought him to the U.S. when he was 7.
Are there going to be raids coming our way in the coming months? We don't know that yet.
But you're prepared to stand up and fight back?
Well, we have to be prepared because this is our only country, it's our only home.
Joining me now from Denver, Colorado is Mayor Michael Hancock. Mr. Mayor, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
What is your take on the directive signed by President Trump?
Very disappointing. Cities all over this country have been waiting for the federal government to pass or to come up with an immigration policy, a comprehensive immigration policy. But that's not what we got today. We got an executive order that was somewhat vague, commits this nation to building a wall along its southern border that commits billions of dollars, instead of investing in helping to strengthen our nation and investing in the economic framework of our nation and many of our cities, quite frankly. And, you know, it lacks vision, it lacks leadership, and I think it's a missed opportunity.
Well, in a statement, you said the executive orders signed today put our economic security as a nation at risk, and I am deeply disappointed. What kind of consequences do you think could come from this policy?
Well, one is it puts a lot of people in our cities in fear. And as mayors across this nation, we have been discussing this. Many of our residents recognize, and we certainly recognize, that one of our chief responsibilities is to protect our residents. And we've been spending the last few months really trying to encourage folks and reassure them that we're going to be okay and they're going to be okay. Tonight, the executive order really puts a lot of that in question, and a lot of the folks who we are working to protect every day are now in a great deal of fear and concern for their families, that they're going to be needlessly torn apart from their families. So we're going to have to work to reassure people that we'll make sure that we, while complying with federal immigration laws, will do everything necessary to protect the residents of our city, immigrant or not.
So, Mr. Mayor, is your city a sanctuary city?
The city of Denver is a city that is inclusive, open, and has always welcomed people to our city. We, again, have been hoping for an immigration policy, a comprehensive one, so that we can move forward with a path of engaging folks lawfully in our city so they can reap the opportunities of this great nation as well. We've never passed a policy to be a sanctuary city, but we're an open and inclusive city, one in which we value greatly in our state of Colorado.
The executive order, as I understand it, allows the Department of Homeland Security to declare cities to be sanctuary cities, and it describes a sanctuary city as one that by, quote, statute, policy, or practice prevents or hinders the enforcement of federal law. Are you concerned that you could lose federal funding as a result of your city's policy?
Nothing in the executive order today, Elaine, in consultation with our city attorneys, we are not in violation of anything that was mentioned in the executive order today. We have always been cooperative with the federal government and the federal immigration statutes. We've complied with those laws. But we also have values in this city, values of open inclusiveness, and quite frankly, values that say that we don't needlessly tear families apart. We would rather have a plan going forward that all of us in this nation are following. Mayors all this country have been asking for a plan. And we've asked the federal government to give us a comprehensive immigration strategy so that we can incorporate the hopes and dreams of the immigrants who are in our city. And that's what's important to us. And those are the values that we believe are not only inherent in Denver, but our American values. But
you're not concerned, though, that you might be found to be in violation and therefore subject to losing federal funds?
We don't believe we're in violation of any of the federal laws and not of this executive order as it is written today.
So what is the plan in the meantime right now for you and your city?
Right now, it's very important for us to reassure all of our residents that we'll do everything we can to keep them safe. We will continue to comply with the federal laws, but more importantly, continue to push the president, his administration, and Congress to come up with a comprehensive immigration strategy. Quite frankly, that's leadership. And that's what the American people should hope and expect for, and that's what keeps our economic opportunities of this nation intact. And quite frankly, is more practical than trying to place fear and hopelessness in 11 million people who happen to be in our nation.
All right, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll take a look at the headlines that will give you a head start for Thursday, including new comments from Hillary Clinton. Plus, President Trump weighs in on terrorism and torture, saying we have to fight fire with fire. But what do the experts say? We'll ask one when Red and Blue returns after this. Here's a look at some of the headlines you'll be talking about on Thursday. Newsweek reports senior Trump administration staffers have active accounts on a Republican National Committee email system. It's the same system former President George W. Bush's administration was accused of using to get around transparency rules. Newsweek says some of the staffers with the accounts include Kellyanne Conway, Jared Kushner, Sean Spicer, and Steve Bannon. And Politico reports an electrical contractor is suing President Trump's Washington hotel for $2 million. The suit says the Trump organization didn't pay for nonstop work done before the hotel's opening last year. The suit also alleges Trump's businesses have pressured contractors to accept reduced payments for work in the past. And Hillary Clinton tells People magazine she wants the millions who marched in protest of Donald Trump's inauguration to keep up the momentum. Clinton notably attended the inauguration last week and told the magazine she did so to, quote, honor democracy and its enduring values. President Trump said in an interview airing Wednesday that intelligence officials tell him torture works.
But I have spoken as recently as 24 hours ago with people at the highest level of intelligence, and I asked them the question, does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes, absolutely.
This comes as reports say President Trump may order a review that could lead to the CIA bringing back a program for holding terror suspects in secret overseas black site prisons. But some members of Congress think this would be a bad idea.
Congress has spoken, and when it comes to enhanced interrogation techniques, that sort of thing, my understanding is I haven't seen the new executive action or what's being proposed, but my understanding is that they're going to look at, examine some of those issues. But with respect to torture, that's banned. The Army Field Manual, it makes that very clear, and the law now is tied to the Army Field Manual.
Well, I think that this would be a step backward, and I'm not alone in thinking that the path he's going down is wrong. It is not about our values as a country, and don't ask me, just ask John McCain.
And Senator John McCain said in a statement Wednesday, "We are not bringing torture back in the United States of America." Former CIA Covert Operations Officer Mike Baker joins me now. So, Mike, the president says he believes enhanced interrogation techniques work. Can you explain, first of all, what enhanced interrogation is?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're revisiting something that we didn't think we'd be talking about after all this time. Enhanced techniques, look, in a simple sense, if you have a high-value detainee, one option is to sit and talk with them, right? That's it. You're trying to develop a relationship. I don't want to make this too simple, but you're trying to develop a relationship. It takes a period of time, and it may or may not work. But it is usually, whether it's for the CIA, the FBI, or anyone else in the past, that was always the go-to, even though the enhanced techniques gathered most of the attention. Enhanced techniques then move into areas like very monitored sleep deprivation over short periods of time. It can include very monitored stress positions. And so those are considered enhanced techniques. What took all the air out of the conversation, of course, was the use of waterboarding on a handful of occasions. And at a certain point, as we all know, eventually the previous administration decided, okay, we're going to take all of those off the table and simply go by what's allowed in the Army Field Manual, which essentially is talking to the detainee.
Oh, so besides what President Trump said in that interview, the New York Times published a purported draft executive order on U.S. interrogation methods that White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said Wednesday was, quote, not a White House document. What do you think? You've had a chance to look at it. What do you think of this document?
Well, here's what I think. We're not going to go back to the days, I don't believe, no matter what the sort of the immediate short-term headline may suggest, we're not going back to the days of using enhanced techniques. Now, here's the rub. People will say, well, waterboarding doesn't work. Enhanced techniques don't work. Well, what does work is keeping the detainee unaware of what potentially could happen to them. That is, by definition, what you're trying to do in an interrogation situation. You're trying to make it so that they're always on their back foot. They're always unsure of what could happen. When you take that mystery away, when you take that out of the kit bag, whether you're going to use any enhanced techniques or not, if you just declare, we're never going to do any of that, well, then the detainee has very little concern about what could be happening down the road. And so they have also very little interest in cooperating because they know exactly what you can and can't do. So my point has always been, I don't want to go back to those days of saying, yeah, let's put waterboarding back on the table. But it was a mistake to tell all those hostile elements out there who do not have our best interest at heart. It was a mistake to tell them what we could and couldn't do, whether we were going to do those things or not.
So then I guess the natural follow-up question to that, Mike, is would we be safer if waterboarding was back on the table, you think?
Well, I think it's a hypothetical question because I don't think we're going back there. But this is where it's layered. This is where it doesn't lend itself to sort of the histrionics that engulfed this conversation several years back. We're safer if we have an environment where those detainees don't know what we're willing or able to do. That's my point. I don't think we're going to go back to it. Look, torture doesn't work. Torture, I'm no problem saying, torture doesn't work. Do enhanced techniques, the judicious use of enhanced techniques, and if people had if people knew what an actual, not Abu Ghraib, that was not an interrogation facility, but an actual interrogation center looks like, it is a very labor-intensive place where you do all your homework, because your point of view is you go in to sit down with that detainee. Yes, you want to get them to talk. You want that relationship. That's what you're after. You're not after to go straight to guns with an enhanced technique. That's not the point of the exercise. But to have that as a potential in the mind of the detainee so that they don't know what's coming down the pike, that helps you. That helps the ability to try to move that relationship along further so that you can get the information that may then operationally be important to preventing, disrupting, or minimizing a hostile operation.
Well, as you know, there are some in Congress who are adamantly opposed to the notion of enhanced interrogation techniques. But I'm curious what you think. What other obstacles do you think the Trump administration could face if it tries reversing any bans on enhanced interrogation techniques?
Well, I think they'll get a great deal of pushback, frankly, from the CIA itself, saying, look, we've already, in a sense, litigated this in a very public way. And I don't think they want to go back down that road because, you know, they would likely consider the fact that, look, we did what we were asked to do, what was authorized during the Bush administration, and then suddenly another administration comes in and there's no top cover. And then suddenly there was a potential for officers at the CIA and elsewhere who had been engaged in authorized activity to suddenly become, you know, in the firing line criminally. And nobody wants to go back to that. So I think the idea somehow that the White House will arbitrarily say, we're going to do this, they're going to get a great deal of pushback, I suspect, from the CIA, from the military, and other agencies within the intel community. You're going to say, no, look, let's just move on. Let's move forward. Let's not move backward.
Well, it's not at all a straightforward issue, as you've just spelled out for us. Mike Baker, thanks so much for your perspective. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stick with CBSN Thursday to see President Trump deliver remarks at a 3-day Republican retreat in Philadelphia. The president will be speaking at 12 p.m. Eastern and will bring it to you live. And before we go, a moment of levity. We've rarely seen this side of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Check out what happened during his recent visit with a group of college students. Okay, that was Vladimir Putin at Moscow State University. That was Wednesday. They were singing a song about space exploration called 14 Minutes to the Launch. The ballad became a trademark for the USSR after cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin orbited Earth in 1961. After the break, I'll get you caught up on the rest of the day's news, including a look back at the incredible life and career of the late Mary Tyler Moore and the latest outpouring over her death. We'll see you back here again on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. You're watching CBSN.